The sound came first. Tick, 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 but not the way a clock is meant to tick. This one ticked in reverse, soft and slow, like footsteps stepping backward through time. Inside the old village of Fern Hollow, nestled between golden hills and sleepy streams, the sound came from a forgotten room in the attic of a crooked little cottage at the edge of Windrow Lane. Dust floated in the beams of morning light that crept through a round attic window. Beneath a pile of patchwork quilts and wooden toys sat a curious clock, its hands spinning not forward but steadily back. The air around it felt cooler, like the hush before snowfall, even though it was midsummer outside. A spider had spun a silver web across its wooden face. But still, the clock ticked, slowly unwinding the hours no one else could feel. Downstairs, the scent of cinnamon toast curled through the house, and the muffled footsteps of a girl named Elsie danced across the floorboards. Her feet always found the creaky spots, and her laughter often startled the crows outside. She did not know the attic had begun to stir. Nor did she see the pale blue glow, now pulsing from beneath the door at the top of the stairs, a soft light, as if the clock itself were dreaming. Outside, the village bell chimed 8 times, but inside the attic, the strange clock reached 7, then 6, and kept ticking backwards. And though no one had touched it for nearly 50 years, the clock that ran backwards had just started counting down. Elsie Mayweather was not the sort of girl who left things alone. If a cupboard was shut, she opened it. If a stone was strange, she turned it over. And if a door was locked, she found a way in, especially if that door was at the top of the stairs and hadn't been opened since before she was born. She had heard stories, of course. All children in Fern Hollow had. They whispered of the clock in the attic that had once belonged to great-grandfather Thistle, a clever man with wild hair who used to build clocks that did more than tell time, clocks that could sing, clocks that could dream. Some said he had built a clock so powerful it could take time and twist it like ribbon. But no one had seen that clock, not for years and years, and most grown-ups just smiled when asked. That was just a story, they said, just fairy tales. But now, as Elsie stood at the foot of the attic stairs, she saw the faintest shimmer of blue light shining beneath the door. It blinked, soft as a heartbeat. Her hand reached for the knob, even as the air grew cooler, and her skin tingled like it did during a thunderstorm. The door opened with a groan. Dust swirled and danced in the golden light from the window. Everything was still, yet something had shifted. A hush, like the moment before a secret is spoken. There it was, nestled between old trunks and forgotten toys, a tall wooden clock, taller than Elsie, its face carved with swirling vines and silver moons. The hands spun backward, slow and steady, and the ticking echoed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She stepped closer. Her fingers hovered just above the glass. The wood was warm, and the soft ticking felt alive, like the purring of a sleeping animal. Then she noticed tiny carvings along the frame, too small to see unless you were looking. Pictures. A girl with a lantern, a boy with wings, a dragon curled around a tree. Each one seemed to shimmer for a moment, then return to stillness. And just below the face of the clock, where a keyhole might have been, sat a small round button made of silver. Elsie pressed it. At once, the room shifted. Not with noise or flashing light, but with a gentle folding, like the turning of a page. The attic vanished. The sunlight disappeared. And Elsie was no longer standing on floorboards, but on soft, mossy ground beneath a sky filled with stars that blinked like clock hands. Around her rose a forest, not dark, not frightening, but strange and beautiful. Trees bent gently toward her, their leaves whispering in voices too quiet to understand. A path of glowing stones led into the woods, and above her, fireflies drifted like falling sparks. She blinked, once, twice, but the forest stayed. The clock stood behind her, unchanged except for one thing: its hands had stopped, and in the stillness, the ticking had vanished. Elsie turned toward the path. She did not wonder if she should follow it. Her feet were already moving. The stones glowed warmer with each step, lighting the way through trees that swayed in a wind that didn't touch her skin. She saw things between the trunks, eyes watching, softly blinking. But they held no malice, only quiet curiosity. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a song remembered from a dream. It drew her forward until she stepped into a wide clearing bathed in silver light. And there, standing in the center, was a boy about her age, dressed in clothes that shimmered like clockwork. Gears spun on his cuffs, a tiny hourglass hung around his neck. His eyes were bright as polished brass, and his smile felt like something Elsie had known long ago but forgotten. He did not speak, but pointed to the sky. Elsie followed his gaze and gasped. Above them, the stars were moving. Not slowly like in the real world, but in great swirling spirals, as if the sky itself was spinning backward. Moons shifted places. Clouds danced in reverse. Even the wind moved oddly, pulling petals back onto flowers. Then the boy turned and beckoned her. Together, they walked beyond the clearing, through arches of woven branches and fields, where time bent like glass. She saw trees growing in reverse, blossoms folding back into buds, birds flying backward through the air, with wings flapping the wrong way. Everywhere the world ran backward. Yet nothing felt broken, just different. Finally, they came to a small cottage, round and warm-looking, with golden light shining through heart-shaped windows. Smoke curled backward into the chimney, and a cat outside yawned in reverse before trotting backward around the porch. Inside, an old woman sat by the fire. Her hair was white as snow, and her eyes glowed the same soft blue as the light from the attic. She looked at Elsie as though she had been waiting forever. She held out a cup of tea, which filled itself as Elsie took it. Then, the woman raised one hand and tapped her heart. Slowly, she pointed to the spinning stars above, then back to the clock around the boy's neck, and finally to Elsie. A story unfolded without words. The clock that ran backwards had once kept the balance of time for both worlds, the normal world and the hidden world of untime, where moments could be unmade and mistakes undone. But long ago, something had gone wrong. Someone had tried to use the clock's power not to understand time, but to control it, to freeze it, to keep the good moments forever and never let the sad ones come. But time did not like being held. It fought back. And so the clock had been locked away, its power sealed, until someone brave enough, curious enough, and kind enough found it again. The boy smiled sadly and placed the hourglass in her hands. Sie understood. The clock was waking, and so was the old danger. If its power was used wrongly again, time could unravel not just here, but everywhere. Memories would unstick, days would repeat or vanish. People would forget how to move forward at all. And the only one who could set it right was someone who didn't want to change time for herself, but to protect it for everyone else. The boy pointed back along the path. It was time to go. As she stepped away from the fire, the boy placed something in her hand. A single silver gear, warm and humming. She tucked it into her pocket and felt it pulse like a heartbeat. The journey back was different. The forest sighed as she passed, and the stars blinked slowly, as if watching her go. The clock stood where she had left it, its hands still frozen. When Elsie pressed the button again, the attic unfolded like paper being smoothed flat. The light from the window returned, the dust fell quietly, the air was still. But something had changed. The gear in her pocket was warm. The clock began to tick not backward, not forward, but slowly, steadily, in rhythm with her breath. She stood in the quiet attic, listening. And beneath the sound of ticking, she heard something else, a whisper of leaves, a boy's silent smile, and the hum of a world where time could bend but never break, not while someone was there to protect it. And Elsie knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Days passed, but Elsie could not forget. Not the whispering trees, not the firefly sky, not the boy who smiled without speaking. Something in her had shifted, like the tick of the clock now hidden behind the attic door. It no longer ran backwards. It no longer ran forwards either. It ticked slowly, carefully, as if waiting to choose. The silver gear in her pocket grew warmer with each passing day. Down in Fernhollow, time went on as usual. The baker's loaves rose at dawn. The village bell rang at 8, then 12, then 6. But to Elsie, everything felt wrong. Or not wrong, exactly. Just not right. At school, she watched the hands of the wall clock, waiting for them to falter. At night, she dreamed of clocks and forests and starlit skies. Then one morning, she awoke to silence. No birds, no footsteps, no wind, just stillness. She ran downstairs. The clocks had stopped. Every single one. Her wristwatch, the kitchen timer, even the bell in the tower stood frozen, its hammer mid-swing. Outside, the world was stuck in a hush. Leaves hung motionless in the air. A cat in the road remained mid-step, as if caught between 1 second and the next. The attic door stood open. A chill swept over her as she climbed the stairs. The clock stood still, but not silent. It made no ticking sound, only a low, slow hum, like the earth itself sighing in its sleep. The silver gear in her pocket burned gently, and when she touched the clock's face, it shifted. The carvings had changed. The girl with the lantern now held a broken chain. The boy with wings had vanished. The dragon was gone, and in its place curled a shadow, long and thin, with too many eyes, and a grin like an empty tunnel. The vines around the clock's face were twisted and dry. The clock began to glow. Light spilled out, brighter this time, colder. It wrapped around her and pulled, not gently, not kindly, but with the strength of something ancient and impatient. The attic vanished once more. She was in the forest, but it was no longer golden or soft. The trees were stiff and brittle, their leaves gray and trembling. The path of glowing stones was cracked, the fireflies were gone, and the stars above no longer spun. They hung frozen, dimmed. Something had stolen the time. A low growl came from the trees. It was not an animal's sound. It was deeper, sadder, like the sound of a clock that had forgotten how to tick. The boy stepped out from behind a tree. But he was not the same. His eyes no longer shone. The gears on his cuffs hung loose and rusty. The hourglass around his neck was shattered. And behind him, floating just above the ground, came the shadow. It wasn't made of smoke, though it looked like it. It shimmered like a memory you couldn't quite keep. It slithered, wrapping its long fingers around the boy's shoulders like a cloak. Its mouth did not move, but Elsie could feel its voice cold and smooth, slipping into her thoughts like ice through cracks. It told her the truth. It had been trapped long ago. When great-grandfather Thistle sealed the clock, he had known the danger. Time was not meant to obey anyone, and yet the shadow had tried. It had whispered promises to the old clockmaker, promises of keeping his happiest days forever, of undoing every mistake, of stopping every tear before it fell. But time that only smiles grows sick. Great-grandfather Thistle had realized too late. He built the backward clock to reverse the damage, to seal the shadow inside its own endless loop. But it had found a way to wait. A way to sleep and whisper and wait again until someone curious enough touched the clock and pressed the silver button. Now it was free. And the boy, his name once lost to time, had been the first to listen. He had tried to fix what he thought was broken. He had wanted to reverse one small mistake. Just one. But the shadow had crept in, offering a different kind of help. Elsie watched as the boy's hands trembled. He held a second gear, black, not silver, and the shadow curled tighter around him. The world began to crumble. Trees folded in on themselves. Stones shattered silently. The sky flickered like a broken lantern. And behind it all, the shadow whispered its offer to Elsie this time. She could fix everything. She could bring back every happy moment. She could undo the times she had cried. She could freeze the days when laughter had come easily, when her parents smiled more, when the world was safe and simple. All she had to do was place the silver gear into the clock and let the backward time begin again. For a moment, her fingers twitched. She saw herself holding her mother's hand again after school. She saw her dog, Pip, running across the field before he'd grown too old. She saw warm nights and soft lullabies and days that never ended. She almost stepped forward, but then she looked at the boy. His eyes were full of sadness, not for himself, but for what he had allowed. He had once believed the same, that good times were better than real ones, that joy could replace truth, that pain could be erased, like pencil on paper. But without the hard moments, the soft ones had no meaning. Elsie took a step back. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver gear. It pulsed in her palm, steady and warm, not burning, not cold, just alive. The shadow hissed. It lunged, its many eyes flaring. The trees screamed as it passed. Time began to warp. Elsie fell to her knees, the ground shifting like a tilted table. But she did not let go. She closed her eyes and pressed the silver gear to her heart. Then, she spoke not with her mouth, but with her thoughts, clear and true. Time should move forward, even if it hurts, even if it breaks, because that is how it heals. The gear vanished, and something answered. A chime rang out, not loud, but pure. A sound so bright it cut through the darkness like sunrise on cold glass. The clock, far behind her in the attic, began to tick again. Not backward, not forward, but right. The shadow screamed. It shrank, flailed, and twisted. But the light was stronger. The vines around the clock's carvings bloomed. The forest breathed. The stars blinked. And the boy, his eyes wide, was lifted from the shadow's grasp. With one last flickering shudder, the shadow vanished. The world exhaled. Trees straightened. Colors returned. A warm wind stirred the leaves, and the fireflies blinked back into the sky, dancing like sparks in the night. The boy stood slowly. His hourglass was whole. His gears spun bright and true, and when he looked at Elsie, he nodded not in thanks, but in understanding. They had both learned, and though no words passed between them, they knew it was time to return. Not to forget, but to move forward. Because forward is where life lives. The soft wind that had returned to the forest guided Elsie back to the place where it all began. The trees leaned gently out of her way. The fireflies circled her shoulders like tiny stars coming home. And just behind her, the boy followed, quiet but no longer burdened. His hourglass glowed faintly, the sand within flowing not quickly, not slowly, but just right. As she reached the clearing, the clock stood waiting. It looked different now. The vines carved into its frame had blossomed with tiny golden flowers. The carvings shimmered in the light of the fireflies, showing not only the girl with the lantern and the boy with wings, but something new, a heart made of gears, a forest bathed in starlight, a silver thread weaving through time. And in the center of the clock's face, the hands no longer spun backward. They moved gently forward, 1 second at a time, in perfect rhythm. Elsie placed her palm against the wood. The warmth spread through her fingers, her arm, her chest, until it filled her whole body. But it was not the warmth of magic. It was the warmth of courage. The kind that stays even when the fireflies are gone. The kind that whispers you are enough. A sound like turning pages filled the clearing. The forest folded once more. The attic returned. Dust floated gently in the air, and morning light poured through the round window. The old wooden floor creaked beneath her shoes. The smell of cinnamon toast curled faintly up the stairs. But Elsie knew she had not dreamed. The silver gear was no longer in her pocket. The carvings on the clock had changed forever. And when she glanced at the corner of the attic, the tiniest flicker of blue light shimmered, then winked out like a secret. Downstairs, time had begun to move again. The village bell rang 8 soft notes. The birds outside sang their usual morning songs, and the old cat from next door meowed lazily from its windowsill, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But Fern Hollow was quieter that day. Clocks were checked, but no one could explain why they had all stopped at once, or why the hands had started again just a moment later, without a sound or warning. Most villagers simply shrugged and went back to their morning routines. Only Elsie noticed the change. People paused more often that week. The grocer smiled more kindly. Children laughed more freely, and no one seemed to rush. Even the old-school clock, which had always run too fast, now ticked gently, perfectly in time with the sun. Still, life went on. Elsie helped her mother bake a pie that afternoon. She read the same book 3 times to her little brother without once hurrying the words. And when the sun dipped low behind the golden hills, she stepped outside to watch it sink. Not because it was special, but because it was beautiful. And she didn't want to miss a moment of it. As the days passed, Elsie began to understand something even deeper. The clock that ran backwards hadn't been evil. It had been built to help people see that time was a gift, not a problem to be solved. That pain and joy were threads woven together in the same great story. And that trying to keep only the happy parts was like picking only the petals of a flower and expecting it to grow. The boy from the forest did not return, not in the way she remembered. But sometimes, when the moon was full and the wind bent just right, Elsie would hear the soft whirring of tiny gears as she drifted off to sleep. And once, when she held her lantern out by the garden gate, she saw footprints that hadn't been there a moment before, light, careful, and just the size of hers. The clock in the attic never ticked loudly again. It kept quiet time now, hidden behind soft wood and sleeping toys. But every so often, when she passed it, Elsie would press her hand to the wood. And in return, the clock would hum warm and steady, like a heartbeat, not her own, but deeply familiar. As the years passed, she grew taller. Her feet found new creaky spots in the floor. Her questions grew bigger, her voice stronger. But one thing stayed the same. She never stopped watching time, not to control it or fear it, but to understand it. And always, always to cherish it. When winter came, she watched the snow fall not for what it covered, but for what it revealed. Footprints, laughter, silence. And when spring returned, she listened to the soft unfolding of petals, like tiny seconds opening into hours. The clock had taught her something most grown-ups forgot, that even sadness has a season. That time cannot be stored like jam in a jar. That moving forward is not about leaving things behind, but carrying them with care. And one day, when her own children asked about the strange door at the top of the stairs, she smiled, not the smile of someone hiding a secret, but of someone ready to share it. Because stories, like time, must move forward. They must be told. And so she would tell them about the forest of starlight, the boy with the broken hourglass, and the shadow that whispered lies. But most of all, she would tell them about a girl named Elsie, who pressed a silver button not to escape time, but to understand it. And about a clock that, for a little while, ran backwards, so that everything could begin moving forward again.